I think we're ready. We'll call this meeting to order. Please rise for the Pledge of Allegiance in a moment of silence. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. We have roll call, please.
Commissioner Ansorgi.
Here.
Commissioner Rushton.
Present.
Commissioner Bonnick.
Here.
Commissioner Wessel.
Here.
Commissioner Sudis-Little.
Here.
Commissioner Rettenbach.
Here.
Commissioner Lautner.
Present.
Thank you. So then that would bring us to the purpose of this public hearing, and we have to. I would recognize the chairperson of the Airport Commission, is Mr. Doug Young is here, as well as the head of the airport, Mr. Kevin Klein. I'll turn it over to Mr. Klein for introduction. He's going to do a roundabout, and it'll just be an open forum. I would like to say that minutes probably will not be taken for questions and that go to Mr. Klein, because they won't be directed to the commission, and they won't be able to hear it from the secretary. So minutes will be minimal from this meeting as far as questions and answers. Just so you're aware of that when you go back to look at the minutes.
Good morning, and thank you for having us. I just would like to introduce Commissioner Doug DeYoung, who is our chair of the Northwestern Regional Airport Commission. So I'll hand over opening remarks to Mr. DeYoung.
Good morning, Commissioners. Mr. Chair, thank you for having us here today. You know, as I've served on the Airport Commission for just over 5 years, I just started my third term on the commission. And there's been a lot of discussion about why we're here today and what really is what we're trying to accomplish. It all started with our strategic plan that we had at the commission about a year and a half ago, where we looked at the opportunities that the Airport Commission had, the challenges that we had, and where the future of the airport could go. As owners of the airport, both you and Grand Traverse County have a real opportunity here to look at the asset and look at the future and look at the opportunities of the asset and moving it forward. Out of that strategic plan, it became very clear that our current agreement that we have with both the counties to operate the airport is outdated. There are challenges within the agreement that are in violation of FAA guidelines, FAA statutes, and potentially could be illegal if we followed through with some of the actions that are actually in the agreement. So because of that, we looked at what could happen next. And really the opportunities that could happen next was changed in 2015 with the passage of the Airport Authority Law at the state level, which allowed for the creation of airport authorities. Prior to that change, we would have probably considered a new agreement, a new modification of the existing agreement and an existing commission. Because of that, we have another option to look at. And because of that, we determined that it was probably best to have an advisory committee to look at the models, to look at the opportunities, and to move forward. So in March of 2019, an advisory committee was formed. You appointed Commissioner Rushton, Commissioner Bonnick to that, and Administrator Janik to that committee. Grand Traverse County appointed two commissioners and their administrator to that committee, and the Airport Commission appointed 2 people to that committee as well, and along with Director Klein. So what came out of that was a number of meetings and a series of really a look at the models, a look at the opportunities, a look at where we could move forward. Because of the new law and because of this opportunity, the advisory committee felt that it was in the best interests of the counties and of the airport to look at possibly moving to an authority and looking at all of the opportunities that come with an authority. Currently, there are liability issues that fall on the airport property that both counties potentially could have. The airport cannot be as nimble as it possibly can in a business setting in today's world. There are challenges with easements and land on the property that need to be addressed. So there's a number of things that can be addressed moving forward and can be easily addressed as an authority, and a little bit more challenged to do as a modified commission. I want to thank you for this opportunity to let the public provide comment. I want to thank you for this opportunity to really look at where we can move this asset and your asset that you are a part owner of forward. I think there are really good opportunities to look at where we're going to be. At the end of the day, no matter what happens, whether you look at a modified commission and we do create a new agreement, because at minimum that has to be done, or if we look at what the state gave us as an opportunity to become an authority and use the authority model, which still you have control of, and still you have opportunities to appoint, and still you have opportunities to really look and have guidance over. There's a number of ways that can be done. So I just would have an open mind in looking at these opportunities. I would recommend that we listen to the public today, get their feedback, answer their questions, and really look at the model that could come out of this moving forward. I would like to just point out that Commissioner Plamondon, our newest year appointee to the Airport Commission, is here as well, and we thank him for being here today. At the end of this, I think there will still be an airport, there will still be this asset that we have in this community, which is a huge economic driver for our community. We have seen our numbers grow dramatically over the last decade, and we, even this year, continue to grow over last year's, and we continue to add airlines with direct flights to cities that were not even believable 10 years ago and where we are today. So the growth has been great, the opportunities have been great, the way the airport has run, we are self-sustaining. We have never come to this board to ask for money, and I think that's important to recognize how self-sustaining we are and where we stand in today's, in today's world of airports around the country. And I just thank you again for this opportunity, and I would turn it back over to you to move forward.
Go ahead, Kevin.
What we'd like to do as a format this morning is to invite everyone, the public, to take the opportunity to review all the board information that's around the room, to be able to ask questions of all those present. Commissioner DeYoung, the others that were on the AGA committee. Nate Elter is also here from Grand Traverse County. Spencer Gillette is also here with the airport and the consultants. So great time to be able to ask point blank questions, and then after we're through, I'd like to come back then and answer any questions that may conclude our session.
So I would say that we invite the public up to read the boards. Is that what you'd like
Yeah.
to do? And then ask any questions of commissioners or anyone you want, really, about any of the things that are on this, and maybe explain the boards to them?
Sure. Our start of the boards will be over here. That kind of talks about the purpose and need, the history and background, the legislation that goes through, some of the governance models that are throughout the airport or the state of Michigan, some of the current agreement deficiencies, some advantages and disadvantages, and then we'll progress through some potential timelines.
So we'd like to open it up if you would like to read it. It is much of that was in the emails that they had sent out that was on the website, so it's just a pretty much a repeat of those items here. But, or are there any questions that anyone has at the beginning?
Is this going to be, is this going to be an opportunity for us to address our commissioners as well?
Yeah.
Since you're the people who exercise our right of ownership over this airport. It's well and good to have all this informal dialogue, but I think this, as a public hearing, requires that we be able to put on the record our concerns.
And that if you want to come forward and do that, we can get it. But I'm just saying, if you go and talk to Kevin, personally and ask them questions, she's not going to be able to record those. You know, or, you know, that was what my purpose of saying that. If conversations are held out in the audience, that won't be in the minutes. But if someone wants to address and I wanted to have this open session like this, and then afterwards, I would bring it back to the board, and then if they wanted to have personal questions to ask to the board or something, we could do that. I mean, this isn't going to be a decision-making time. That will be at our regular meeting, you know, but, so there will be other times you can comment about it, and we will have another one next week in the evening, an open meeting, very similar to this. Commissioner Ansel.
Just a point of order, are we going to take comments on the record at this public hearing?
Yes, I mean, if they want to come forward, put their name, and it has to be up at the table here so that it can be done.
And that's what I'm hearing them asking for, and
Yes.
when are we going to do that?
Well, I thought when it came back to the commission, people would come forward if they wanted to ask questions or make statements or whatever. Does that make sense to you? Yes.
Are you going to set a time for our wandering around time until we reconvene at our desks?
Well, I mean, I hadn't planned on it, but we could if you wanted to. I mean, if 10 minutes would be enough for that, or...
Is that your
Yeah,
discretion?
well, I would just say, it doesn't seem like anybody really wants to come forward and read the board, so, yeah, Commissioner, sir.
I'd like to address the board, and I don't think there should be a time period placed on gaining information here. This is a big decision, and I don't know where the commissioner's coming from, wanting to, I think, maybe stifle us in the, public here.
No, it's not about stifling, it's about looking and reading the boards, giving you some time if you want to read
Well,
those.
the boards are
Then-
all backwards to us, we can't see any.
But you can get up and walk around. They're set up, starting at the beginning, to go left to right, around to read them.
Mr. Chair,
Yes.
this sounds a little bit awkward to me, and I wonder if it might be helpful to
Certainly,
take
Chair.
each board and do a summary statement of it, because I don't know how this big of a crowd can wander through here and read
Okay.
that in a meaningful way.
Yeah, we can
Why don't you go ahead with that?
absolutely.
I think that might work out.
Sure.
And then we can go with the
Absolutely.
questions.
And, you know, just to address the format of what, we did a couple of public hearings in this format, and it's worked out very well for everyone to be able to gain the knowledge and take the time to do that, and then come back and completely address all the questions. It was actually the information to be able to get that out. The purpose and need, Commissioner Young touched on a lot of that information. And, you know, the purpose and need is basically that comes out of the history of the Airport Commission, how it was formed, strategic planning, the business planning that took place, and the conclusion of an agreement that is outdated and has many legal issues to touch base, to work with. So it talks about the formation of the governance committee that Commissioner Dion has talked about. The history of the airport.
Can we ask a question? So what were the deficiencies?
Those will be addressed over here on that board. If you'll give me a minute, I'll be happy to get to those. The history and background of the airport is something that I've done some presentations here and really talked about how the airport was formed back in 1935. Then World War II, the U.S. Navy took over the airport and its operations. At the end of World War II, it was transitioned back to the city of Traverse City. It operated that way until about 1971 in the city format. Then the city asked for the region to participate in an airport commission setup. 2 counties out of their ask of northern Michigan joined. That was Leelanau County and Grand Traverse County. They formed the airport commission, and it's been run in that format until 1990. In 1990, the city of Traverse City left the airport commission. So that's what this particular board is about. In 2017, again, we started looking at the airport commission and its opportunities with the strategic plan. And when we did that, as that information came out, we then formed the governance committee. And in the governance committee, we looked at 4 options. Those 4 options were: 1, no change; 2, a modified commission, 3, an airport authority, or 4, new legislation to create a governance model that might be completely different than what we've seen in the past. Quickly in that discussion, the no change option was removed from the table because there were so many legal issues that were in the document. So, and then new legislation, we're talking with legislators from the state and others. Since the Airport Authority Act was just created in 2015, there was no appetite for the state to take on new legislation for airports. So it narrowed down the decisions to a modified commission, or they follow the Airport Authority Act of 2015. The Michigan legislation, I won't touch on each one on the board because it's legislation and there's lots to it. And it breaks down all the different legislative codes throughout. And it talks about regional airport authority, community airports, and different ways authorities were brought together. One of the things that we found out throughout the Airport Commission, Governance Commission Committee, is that when the Airport Commission was originally put together, they tried to make it as close to an authority model as possible. And really that became evident in the fact that the commission, usually there's a lot of joint resources on a commission level that are shared between the airport and a county. Law enforcement would be a great example. Pension funds, insurance liability, or insurance policies. A lot of those things, human resources, purchasing, would be shared as a commission. That didn't happen with the setup of the current Airport Commission. What was looked at is, at the time, was to make it as close to an independent authority that the law would allow. At the time, the law only allowed Detroit Metro to be an authority at that time. So that's one of the reasons for the discussion of the authority. Airports in Michigan, this just kind of outlined what some of the top commercial airports in the commission, or the type of governance structure that they have based on passenger enplanements. And so it talks about, on this particular board, Detroit Metro is an authority, Grand Rapids, Flint Bishop, Lansing Capital Airport, and then Manistee. So those are some of the other authorities, and then the commissions. You look at Cherry Capital Airport, MBS, and so that also follows. So that's what this particular board outlines of the other airports in Michigan. This board here talks about airport governance and the percentages, how those governance models fall. The authority being about 29% in Michigan, commissions are about 12% county, single county owned is about 59%. Looking at national picture, you look at city being 24%, commissions 9%, privatized 1%. We'll say 7% others. Others can be universities operating. It can be, we've even seen some tribal operations for airports. So others, it was a grouped category. Port authorities, down here at 7%, and then authority is 30% nationwide. The authority model is trending as the model in the United States going forward. Term deficiencies. So to get back to the question that was brought up. The agreement deficiency, right off the top on the term itself. We have two documents, the joint operating agreement and the lease agreement for operating the airport. One ends in 2049 and one that ends in 2040. Simple issue, but one that causes a lot of issue with lease documents, leasing ability, long-term leases, and business negotiation. No dispute resolution, not only between the Airport Commission and the counties, but between the two counties themselves. So if Leelanau County voted in favor of something and Grand Traverse County voted against something, there's no way to resolve that dispute. It talks about cost sharing in the agreement. 85% of the cost would be Grand Traverse County, 15% of the cost would be Leelanau County. And then, so it just doesn't have any issue to resolve besides those basic principles. Property, review of the property. In past presentations, I've talked about the Airport Exhibit A. It's our property map. And since we received a grant in 2016 and we started reviewing a lot of our properties easements, and this goes back to the original agreement for when the city formed or asked to form the Airport Commission. And even though they may have transferred the property to the counties legally, what they didn't receive was approval from the FAA. So a lot of those approvals from the FAA, when it comes for easements, transfers of property, fair market value, am I missing anything? Transfer agreements, those were never blessed by the FAA. So under the modified commission model, we would have to go back, seek those blessings, and also seek third-party fair market value contributions to the airport. Going to an authority model or transferring of governance, that path is less restrictive. Board membership, there's really not much in the document about board membership. So it's doesn't talk about any methodology of how they're appointed. It just says how many from one, how many from another. So things to talk about. The agreement calls for profit sharing. This is a violation of federal regulation. Federal regulation says, clearly states there is no revenue diversion allowed. All revenue must stay on the airport. So that's a big one that the FAA is looking for. Zoning. The document says the Traverse City will control all zoning at the airport. That is against the state regulation for aeronautical uses. The Michigan Aeronautics Commission is in charge of that, and so that is in direct conflict with law. Deed, there is a reversionary clause in the deed that this would revert back to the city. Again, that's in conflict with federal regulation. Why would a property that you own with Grand Traverse County, if the Airport Commission had an issue with it, why would it revert to the city and not back to the two owners? So there's an issue there. So also there's a blanket easement for the city to put any utilities to run anywhere on the airport. That is in conflict with federal regulation because of the requirement of fair market value and revenue diversion. So it continues in talking about some advantages and disadvantages, and it really touches on, it's a point of view, because one advantage to one county could be a disadvantage to the other county, or an advantage to the airport could be a disadvantage to the counties. For example, I'll look at law enforcement. The airport's growing, so we'll move up in category of law enforcement, that requirement for federal law. So we'll need a full law enforcement officer. Under a commission model, sharing joint resources, the request would be to the counties to have a law enforcement officer provided by the counties. And per the revenue diversion clauses as a commission, we would ask that to be provided at cost. So you would bear the cost of an employee in those, but the hours that they would work at the airport would be charged. And so that's an advantage to the airport. Financially, it's our advantage. Disadvantage to the counties for the additional employees and costs. Under an authority model, if we came to the two counties for that, you have I'll call it an event rate or a contract rate at that particular time,
because of the relationship, it would be different in being authority, you would have the ability to charge us the event rate. So there's a difference in cost there. But it depends on the beholder on whose advantage of it.
Mr. Chairman, may I ask a question? at this point?
Certainly.
Excuse me, Mrs. Klein. Why would we have to bear the cost of that if that is an airport?
We would pay for that cost
Okay.
for what of use, but you would pay the cost of the employee of having that employee.
So the benefits,
Why wouldn't you contract one of our employees?
because you own the airport.
You own the airport. We
But
would
you
do
are-
that under
But we
an
don't,
authority.
there is no profit sharing, we never get any money from the airport.
Correct.
So the airport has fees, keeps all those fees to pay for all of these things, right?
Correct.
We're not sharing snow plowing, we're not sharing repaving of the parking lots, we don't do that, you do all that. So why
Certainly.
wouldn't you just contract a law enforcement official rather than say, well, now you have to pay?
Because under a commission model, that's one of the benefits to the airport, is the shared resources. Under the authority model is exactly how we would say that.
Sounds like a threat.
No, it's
Go
not,
ahead.
it's not, that's just,
Just sounded like.
well, it's not intended to. That's just how one model works versus the other. It's not intended to be.
Kevin, just a point of clarification. When you said we would charge the event rate, I'm not sure what you mean.
There's a different rate for what's the normal cost of an law enforcement officer, and then you have a rate where you charge administrative fees and other things, and so that's,
So we would pay for the employee, but we could charge back to you an event rate.
under an authority model, because we're a different agency than the same common agency as we are. That's the difference of
Thank
what
you.
we're trying to point out. Okay. Other inefficiencies, legal fees. We would share with some of the property work. There's more, some of those property issues would be more shared with the county level under the commission. So some of those legal fees would be shared more. So other advantages, when we look at disadvantages, buying and selling a property, entering leases beyond the agreement terms, no direct control of zoning, the nimbleness of business. So those are some of the other things that were brought out. Some of the other disadvantages and advantages, as we discussed, under commission zoning, there was multiple issues. Under an authority, that becomes under direct control. Property, multiple steps to approve, they're more efficient under an authority, more direct than one stop. Liabilities, under the commission, both counties have liability from an insurance standpoint and legal standpoint. Under an authority, that's one entity. Regulatory, it's just overall expertise in operating, kind of both the same. And then there's some others that go through. Stakeholder input that we've learned from other public hearings, part of the AGA process. We had we had one major public hearing, and then we had public input at each one of our sessions. And the stakeholder input and key concerns that came out, and then some of those that were also surveyed from the members on the AGA and some of the others in the community, was reduced liabilities for the county, both short-term and long-term. More public transparency, accountability, and mechanisms for input. Greater regional perspective, greater business focus, and efficient operations. Clear and modernized legislation to include the proper airport zoning. Safety mechanisms to protect the airport. In general, I'm going to turn to Spencer. the safety.
So that really comes to keeping the airport sustainable and making sure it actually stays in existence for a long duration of time, and that nothing happens to it. So it's just general overall safety.
Yep. Promotion of the airport as a regional asset, provide excellent service to the community, talk about fares, destinations, customer service. The next board was the recommendation of the commission that came forward from both counties. And then talk about the different documentation. And some of these are kind of, when you look at a formation of an authority or a continuance of a modified commission, are very similar. Articles of incorporation, whether you go one way or the other, you're going to have new articles of incorporation. So all the decisions that we're talking about, whether sharing or assets and resources, if you go one direction, that can be addressed in those articles. If you go a different direction, they can be addressed in the articles. So that is all there. Talks about the assignment and assumption agreement of all the responsibilities. One of the things that didn't happen in the previous agreements with the city transferring the property is they were never relieved of their grant responsibilities for taking federal dollars. So some of those things will have to be cleared up no matter what direction you go. Establishing whatever form of governance and getting it approved by the FAA, getting it approved in the right direction state. Again, it talks about that. Property conveyance and how that, whether it's a fee simple transfer, whether it's restrictions and covenants, again, that will be addressed in the whatever agreement goes forward. Talk about the consultant report and the opinion of council. And then this would be just a general timeline. And you can, we use the example of the authority model here, but it's also an example of a commission model. Very similar if a commission, a modified commission was done, on how those target dates would happen.
Commissioner Rush.
Mr. Klein, you made the statement that the city was never relieved of their grant responsibilities.
Correct.
Could you explain that?
Yeah, when you accept federal dollars, there are grant assurances that live with those particular grants. And so in 1971, when the commission took over the operation, they should have transferred those responsibilities to that grant to the commission, and that never took place. So some of that has, with age and time, has expired, but some of the original grants that formed the airport will continue on, and those have to be corrected.
So, if I may, that also applies to each county because federal dollars are being used.
Correct.
So we have to adhere as well.
Correct.
Any other questions, Bob? So I guess now I would open it to the public if they wanted to come forward and ask questions or whatever. Sure, please come forward. I mean, it's open all the time, so I'm just saying that we can get it on record.
First of all, my name is Jay Johnson. I live in Empire Township. Thank you, Commissioner Ansorgi, for insisting that this be more like a real public hearing than a dog and pony show. I'm here with some really long experience in this very issue. When I was a student in law school, I took a course called Government Regulation of Business. And we talked about the FCC and the FAA and all of the various government agencies that regulate businesses in this country. To my surprise, our professor, who went on to become President Reagan's antitrust assistant attorney general in terms of the antitrust division, sprung on us at the last minute a 2-hour written exam, which was to be our entire grade for the course. And I can't remember the exact wording of the exam, but it was basically this. There's been a lot of controversy about expanding airports. People are upset about the noise. People want better services, such things. Your assignment is to construct a completely new airport out in the middle of California, and to do it without spending any federal money on it. How would you do that? And my solution was to use the state power of eminent domain to take over all of the property that would be adversely affected by the airport, people who would be in the noise cone, et cetera, and buy that at a relatively low price because the airport was going to ruin their property values, and then take all of the property that was nearby the airport that you could sell to rental car companies and hotels, et cetera, at a relatively high value. I got an A on the paper. It was the only one I got in law school. And he subsequently hired me as his research assistant, and we worked together for about a semester and a half on exactly some of these same issues. And my concern with this proposal is not with forming an airport authority, not with expanding services at the airport, but in how the airport acquires its property in order to make these expanded uses. And I see nothing in these documents so far that limits the airport authority's power of eminent domain to strictly aeronautical uses. I don't have any problem with lengthening runways or putting in more fire stations or what you need to serve an expanded airport. But I could see Traverse City's airport deciding, oh, they'd like to take that whole corner from Garfield on down to the runway and from Garfield on up to the airport entrance, and take that property by eminent domain and sell it to people who wanted to build hotels, amusement parks, whatever, on the theory that if you improve those kinds of services in Traverse City, you're going to get more aircraft traffic, and that's going to generate more revenue for the airport. And I don't see any limitation in this agreement that prevents that from happening. And I think it's something not Leelanau County needs to be concerned of, but the area in general, because I think this airport authority, as currently designed, has way too much power to take public property for some very vague uses. And I would urge some extra specificity in that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good morning, Commissioners.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Gerald Schatz. I live in Northport. I'm a mostly retired lawyer. In an earlier day, I flew airplanes. I have a commercial instrument ticket, and I love aviation. I am not so fond of many airports. In an earlier day, I was the editor of the law letter of record for the National Transportation Safety Board. It was called Air Safety Law and Technology, and then Air Safety Week. It was my pleasure to attend a meeting of the airport, then called the Airport Operators Council International. And there I learned that the driving force, as enunciated by the keynote speaker, was to realize that airport operators have a captive clientele. The purpose of one of the stated purposes of the Airport Operators Council then was to emphasize the profit opportunities in non-aviation uses of airport assets. And that seems to be one of the purposes of the plan submitted by Baldwin Associates, the consultant to our airport management. I am distressed to find that although one of the purposes of the plan is to do away with lobbying, that Baldwin is a member of the Airport Council International. Much of the Baldwin proposal reiterates what seems to be the airport operator's position, and indeed one of their founding purposes. Now, we love Cherry Capital Airport. It functions on a human scale, it works right, and although there are problems in the legal arrangements among the parties, we can deal with those. All it takes is goodwill, lawyering by people who have no representational conflicts. We can do this, and we can maintain accountability, and we can maintain a very good and hospitable airport for a public that cherishes this airport as a public utility. It is one of our lifelines to the outside world, especially from the Leelanau, and we need not make it inaccessible by artificial developments, non-aviation related, that would raise the cost of the access and use to the Leelanau public or to the Traverse area public. So I urge you to think that the airport management and our representation can revisit this and be more creative, and if we need consultants, get those without conflicts of interest or conflicts of commitment. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Morning. I'm Wayne Wunderlich. I live in Lake Leelanau. And I, having sat on the board when this other agreement was, Melinda and I were on the board at the same time for this, and I didn't agree with a lot of the stuff that was in it, particularly the 85-15 crap. But I mean, there's a lot of things that this thing needs to be redone, really does. But I have, you've answered one of my questions. I've gone over this entire thing. I'm a great margin writer for getting answers to questions. And what bothers me is this new legislation, to create specific legislation for the TV, for Traverse City to form an airport authority under a legislative action. And it bothers me that the state takes so little interest in the economic reality of northern Michigan and what sustains this northern part of this great state. But it's a very brief answer in the sense of they don't want to bother with us, or it, because it requires work. And I would like to commend you on this. I've read this thing through short shrift because I didn't really get at it till Sunday night and part of Monday. But the airport is such a vital aspect of this community, and I'm in business in this county, in Leelanau County, and I know what it affects my tourist customers and the families of people who live here in the in and out, and the growth of going to other states now. I mean, I have easy access to Flagstaff now. I get to Arizona, which I didn't have before, with the growth. It's a valuable asset all over the place for northern Michigan. However, the business of the authority, you have to be very careful with this. And I love what has been said. My big concern has been the foisting of a Costco onto airport property in 2015 when they started that thing, and no information forthcoming from anybody at the Northwest Regional Airport Commission. Even our own representatives never put anything on the table prior to I believe August, and I have the articles here, of 2017, when a site plan was published in the Record Eagle, and the growth of, we're going to put a Costco on the airport at the corner of the entrance and stuff. And I talked to two commissioners about this the day it was published, and neither one of them knew a damn thing about it. It was a big surprise. And those are the kind of things that bother me, the lack of information and forthcoming of these things. And I presented one time when we were talking in this very room, I asked Mr. Klein and his two attorneys, or whatever they were, do you need permission from Leelanau County to do this Costco thing? And there was a direct no. Okay? And the discussion about authority and eminent domain, and there's a very, very big bulb here about what they want to be able to do with the property. And the Costco issue rezoned acreage there to build that. And transportation zoning was changed to commercial. And that's subject to development now. And South Airport West has a lot of development down the road, but it stopped just partially down. But now we're talking about expansion of all kinds of services that are non-aeronautical. And it bothers me because we're talking about the possibility of, this is the main reason that Costco sits on that corner is $168,000 a year to the airport for lease. And I got quotes here. Well, we're going to use that, we can do that because it's going to be considered aeronautical because we're going to get the lease money against it. And so, you know, I spent time trying to negotiate at times, why didn't we put the beta system on the airport transportation property? Now we're going to talk about building out on Lafreniere. I don't hear anybody discussing, well, let's put the transportation for the beta system in the airport somewhere. I mean, it's room for discussion on these issues because it's available and it's there and you can do those things. And the lack of discussion in these issues with this airport, particularly in the vein of what they want to do with properties. I don't know where they want to go with these properties. The makeup, there's nothing in here about the makeup of the authority other than there's no numbers as to what kind of numbers are going to be here. Restrictions of 45% of elected officials. Is this going to be, because this is taking on, as Anna said, taking on a regional attitude as opposed to a Traverse City or Grand Traverse City. Are we involving more regional? We've begged for years to get Benzie and Kalkaska and Wexford involved in the airport. Their answer is no thank you, we don't need part of that crap, you know, and that's the way they look at it. How are we going to expand regional market that way? Are we going to be pulling them into the authority as a regional operation? And what are their responsibilities going to be if that's the case? My brief notes. What agreements will be in place concerning ownership of the property? You're talking about on one of the things about transfers of who's going to own this property? Leelanau County and Grand Traverse yet? Are we turning the property over to you on a quick deed? What?
That's to all be decided under those articles.
All right. How many people are going to be on this thing? Okay, all right. See, but that doesn't say that here, that we're going to have to do this stuff. And you're going to, I admire you for the time it took to put this together. I've sat on some chaired major committees at the county level and been on committees. 3.5 years on one and 4 on task force. This is a lot of work, just this over the last year, and I commend you for what's in here. I find some things that bother me, but the important thing is that here's disadvantages for county authority advantages and county authority disadvantages. May reduce the county's control over decision-making and long-term agreements. And where do we want to, you have to make up your minds where you want to go with this airport and the control and how deep, if we're going to be able to form an authority, and we have the ability to say, what do we want to expand this to? It's like the comment about not being able to vote. With five members from Grand Traverse and 2 members from Leelanau County on the Airport Commission right now, you don't have a majority. You don't have a fair vote there if it's an advantage to Grand Traverse County. And this isn't about being an advantage to either county. It's got to be a fairness issue, where we have a history of Grand Traverse wanting to control most things all the time, simply because they are the biggest, and that's not right. So it's important for those numbers, the decisions to make on what you want. The qualifications are another thing. Who establishes the qualifications to sit on the authority?
The state law and these individuals.
All right, now are there specific qualifications for sitting on an airport authority? I mean,
Within the state law, there are specific.
okay, I've not gone in and reviewed that stuff.
And that's why we didn't go through all this.
Right, I understand that. There's a lot of work to be done here, a tremendous amount of work to be done. And I'm really glad that we're having a couple of public hearings on this. It gives me a chance to vent. But the business of liabilities to the counties, in the sense of paying the airport, just the business of law enforcement. Who pays for it now on the airport?
We're able to do a contract armed guard service.
Okay.
But as we grow, we have requirements to bring in the full rescue.
And that requires the counties to provide that?
No, the example of a modified commission services are typically shared. Under the current agreement, we don't typically share those. Under a modified commission agreement, we look to share some of those resources. So the example of your law enforcement is, you have law enforcement resources at the county level. We look to use those services and pay the contractor money.
A rate back to them.
But under an authority model, it allows the county to charge more. That's just the difference. That was the point of the exercise.
Okay. But then that's something that they're going to have to deal with. The idea that I look at the authority not being able to do millages or establish any type of a tax, special assessments and that kind of thing. But it falls back to your request to the county. If you ask the county to initiate a millage to support airport within their county, will that have to be a joint agreement between Grand Traverse and Leelanau to support? And passing millages, most of our coverage in at least my tax bill are voted millages. Ad valorem taxes are paying for most of the county stuff, but all beta, senior service, all that stuff's voted millage. And a millage to do something in this vein could be very expensive, and you may be in trouble with the public.
Can I answer that for you?
Sure.
The current commission and the authority model the state does not allow us to go for villages.
Right.
The counties, it falls back on the counties. The counties currently own the asset. So if the asset were to default, the counties would have to figure out a way to pay for that default. Under an authority model, an authority could default and figure out a way to pay for it, and there's a buffer between the authority model and the commission model between the counties and the airport. And so right now, if the airport were to default, it is the counties that are responsible for that.
Yeah.
And so they would then have to figure out a way to pay for that.
Now,
whether it be a millage, a bond, or whatever, they would have to do.
But what is the default is what? Against what?
If the airport were to go bankrupt no longer be able to fund, if the airport, right now the airport is self-sustaining because the revenues are coming back in. Say we have a catastrophic 9/11 event again, and you see airlines change their models and airlines change their philosophies. There's a number of things that could create a default, just like any business that
Yeah, okay.
operates. But because of, under the current commission model and a modified commission model, the counties would be liable for that default. Under an authority, the authority would be liable for that default. Ultimately, they could then restructure and figure out a way to pay off. It just, again, depends on how it's set up by the two counties
Right.
and the assets, and the way they want to address the assets.
Okay.
But there are a number of complex issues, as you have pointed out.
Yeah. The, again, we're back to establishing terms of service at this level, okay, and per diems or whatever, those types of things. I don't know whether there's a current per diem for the membership that now for attending board members. Okay. But that could be established. I mean, what I'm saying is that when you start growing and you start getting growth and you get more people.
So that would be a diversion of revenue by the FAA. So the FAA does not allow diversion of revenue. That's why we currently have no per diems for sitting. Now, the county could pay a per diem to its members if it so choose, but I'm a citizen appointed to the commission. There's no per diem opportunity for me, even under an authority model or the commission model, because that would be a diversion of federal funds or revenues, and therefore it's not allowable under the current FAA structure.
Okay, thank you. Okay, I'm done. Thank you much.
Thank you, Wayne.
Good morning.
Good morning.
My name is Richard Schmuckel, 2653 South Cherry Tree Lane, Suttons Bay, 49682. I'm here today to give you folks my thoughts regarding the proposed change on how the Cherry Capital Airport might be covered to an authority. I believe it's a bad idea. And aside from my notes, I didn't know what the forum would be here today. Commissioner Lautner and Commissioner Wunderlich, along with myself, made the decision for the way the current board is being operated, the airport being operated, and we're the ones that gave the authority to build the airport. And you, as commissioners, both remember, and I asked several times Mr. Steve Casson, will we have to raise millage? And he assured us it would be self-supporting. Thank God it has. But that was a big issue, wasn't it, Commissioner Lau?
Yes, it was.
Anyway, back to my notes. I think it's a bad idea. A little about my background. I served 5 terms on the county board. I served on the airport commission for 2 years. I represented the county at the ribbon cutting at the ceremony when we opened the airport, along with Commissioner Pete Strom from Grand Traverse County. He was the chair. It was a high honor for me. I've taken a lot of interest in the airport, and I travel around the world some, and I always ask when I'm at the airport where the people are from, how do you like our airport, and no one has ever been negative. They always give our airport here the highest marks. I'd like to read the remarks by Commissioner Ansort that was made to the Record Eagle on 12 December 2019, as it represents my thoughts as well as I could articulate my position. And it says, Trustee Tony Ansort wanted to know what is prompting the change, especially when the airport is in the black and expanding under the current excellent management. Well thought out, sir. continuing, in quotes, I don't see the problem at Cherry Capital today that needs to be addressed because we're in good shape. And so it said, the problem are we trying to address, what problems are we trying to address by changing the structure? Airport management, and continuing on a little here, consultant Steve Baldwin said the advantages of changing to an authority would have its operating under one board instead of three. And along with you, Commissioner, what's wrong with three? I think you get a better decision if you have three boards making a decision rather than one. It's a more diverse group of commissioners making the decision. And this is the part I have a problem also. It would eliminate the airport commission that now governs the airport and create an authority that could make decisions without having to go to both Grand Traverse and Leelanau County boards for approval. I find that an insult by the company they hired, that you folks here can't make a decision, and that the airport, Mr. Klein, has the time to come to both boards. That's what he's hired for. And so then it goes on here to say later, or further in the article, about the agreement has several deficiencies, and I see them over here. And to deviate from my thoughts here a little, why not deal with those deficiencies? They can be handled. Maybe when we set it up, things have changed. Why try to reinvent the wheel? And I find that, I'm confused about it. And it says the agreement has several deficiencies, Baldwin said, including that it does not contain a process for resolving disputes. For God's sakes, I think you come before the board, anyone has a bitch, you get it resolved. Or if it has to be in writing, it seems like that can be worked. Those seems like minor things to me that can be resolved by the two boards, Grand Traverse and Leelanau County, and the airport board. And then it goes on to say here, the qualifications. Commissioner Wunderlich brought that up. I wonder what gives this firm, the Baldwin firm, the authority to tell us what kind of people we want to serve on the board. I think we're able to, as commissioners, former commissioners and you folks, decide if someone has an interest in it. My recollection of having made these appointments over the years, we look at their resumes, and generally it's someone who has an interest in it. So I don't see why we would have to change to an authority to deal with that issue. Or how you remove a board member. We appoint board members every 2 years, and I suspect, I know a friend of mine resigned from one of the boards, and I met Mr. Johnson this morning at the Veterans Board. He's going to finish up that term. So, and I listed here not knowing what the forum would be here today. Following are some of the accomplishments achieved under the current model of governing. And they are, the airport was moved from the old site to the new location. And most of you probably are aware, it used to be where it was touched on, where the Coast Guard station currently is. Took my first flight out of the old airport coming back from the Army somewhere. And I got to, in those days, you could go up in the second floor and watch the airplanes come in. And so it was pretty memorable to fly on an airplane because our farms are located exactly 14 miles south of Traverse City, right in the flight pattern. We're due south of the airport. And still when I'm at the farm, in the old days, we'd see those DC-3s coming in very low and the Coast Guard planes coming in. Now I see the jets, they're up higher, but I know the runways now, and when I'm out in the field, I look up and see them, try to determine if they're coming from, the Detroit one's always very obvious, whether they're coming from Chicago or Minneapolis, they still fly over our farms. The new facilities were built at a cost of about $60 million or more, was it? That decision was made by the current system. The runways were extended a couple of times at several $1 million, right? So, We installed new runway lighting. That was a huge expense. We built a new control tower. You see it from a long way away. Quite an accomplishment, it seems to me. We bought new equipment to work on the runway maintenance. We leased the Costco property to build their facilities. Established new flight routes to major cities. That's why they hired the gentleman sitting over here. It's his job to do that. And we became the 4th largest airport in passenger load in the state of Michigan. So, in summary, I have here, although some of my thoughts have changed a little listening to the presentation, my suggestion to this board is to work out some of the issues mentioned by the consultant. That one board over there with the deficiencies. It seems like a lot of the issues are right there. Do not give up the authority as commissioners to govern the airport. The current way the airport is being governed has been very successful. There's no need for another level of bureaucracy, which would be not as accountable to the electorate as you commissioners are. I hope you think about that. And I'll conclude by saying that I thank you folks for listening. I'm confident that the decision on this issue is in good hands. Thank you.
Hi, Barb Conley, Northport. I have some brief remarks, and I appreciate all the remarks that people have brought their expertise here, including the presenters. But it occurs to me after listening to all of these that maybe things might be proceeding sort of backwards, and maybe what is needed is to understand where the airport needs to be in 10 or 20 years, and then pick the model of how it should be governed. And I remain concerned that the public have input into the airport's governance going forward. And that's it.
Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Ted Iorio. I live in Traverse City. I don't want you to hold it against me since I'm from a different county. I'm also an attorney, but I would have to admit I never got an A in antitrust. I can't fly an airplane. So that I don't have the mixture that all the other speakers have given you in regard to their hands-on with an airport. I'm a labor lawyer, so my law is completely different. And I only got involved with this because of the clear cutting. And then I found it more interesting about the authority. For any of you that have read Carol's book on Moses in New York City and how he handled the airport, which is a sovereign in terms of how they handle things. I got involved. I spent a lot of time going to the governance meetings, all the BOC sessions in Grand Traverse regarding this issue. And when it was all said and done, and I give great respect to Klein because he's led the charge with the airport, obviously with the community. You got to wonder, the airport's a wonderful airport. I mean, everyone says that, and that's acknowledged. And that makes it one of the problems here, because it is so successful. You say, well, why are we doing all this? And then the consultant comes in and throws out all these issues which have to be addressed. But the way I look at it is, what is the problem? What are the details and the facts that support the problem? How do we fix the problem? It's pretty simple. I think the other speakers have all said the same thing generally. I'm not a proponent or an opponent of the authority, but I'd like to see, here's the problem, here's how we can fix it, and can we fix it in the current format, because whatever has been talked here or spoken here today regarding illegal and that clearly taken care of, because if it's illegal, you can't do it anyway. You don't need an authority to take care of that. But you need meat on some of these issues that are the advantages and disadvantages, and weed those out, and what are the problems? And then let's look at the list of problems and deal with them. I would agree with some of the other speakers here. A dispute resolution between the two counties, that's nothing to put together. I mean, the membership and the criteria, there are standards. The very airport that the Baldwin Group references, Sarasota, as being an example of an airport. They had their man up at the airport at the public hearing saying how wonderful that is. Kent County, Ford's Airport, they got language on all of these matters that you can look at and digest once you squeeze it and get down to it. And when you do get to that, and as the last person up here spoke, this is almost backwards. Because once you know the problems and that you have to change your articles of incorporation if you're going to go modified, that's all. You have to change. If you have bylaws, you have to change the bylaws, and you do that. But I don't know how you do it as we sit here and we get these generic kind of problems that Baldwin has put down, and you don't know what the meat of them is and what does it take. And I found in the public sector, I shouldn't say this in Leelanau County, I don't know how, what the culture is up here in regard to unions, but I dealt with public sector unions in the public sector, and I always know when changes are coming and excuses are used, it's always liability. I wonder if any of us really understands what the potential liability that this county has, which, again, I'm not a bankruptcy attorney or anyone else, but I've dealt in that with organizations. I don't know if that's just a smoke screen being put up there to shake it up, and I'm certainly not suggesting it with Klein, because I've dealt with Klein once a month on some other peripheral issues at the airport, and he's been very good in regard to that. I'm just indicating you don't have enough information here to put it together, and it isn't fair to the public, because I'm just here as the public. I don't know what exactly the changes are going to be, or what are the proposed changes. Let's see them, so when you come in with the boards, you can say, here's the problem, here's the language. Well, I don't like this language on the criteria for the membership, let's say, and here's why I don't like it, or maybe because this is Leelanau County and Grand Traverse, we got Lake Michigan, and tourism is the deal. Maybe you want an environmentalist on that committee. I mean, who knows what you would want? I mean, that's a simple issue. So I commend the fact that the airport and the airport commission has put this all out here. Now I think it's time, sausage is difficult to make. This is like making a piece of sausage, putting this together, but you need all the information on it. And I think if you do, and you get all that, everybody will be much more comfortable, particularly the public, in regard to it. Again, I appreciate your time.
Thank you.
Any other comments? Please come forward.
Excuse my tardiness, but we had snow and all other observations that we have to take care of. I'm here because I'm very interested in...
Could you state your name, please?
Oh, sorry, my name is David Barth. I'm a resident of Leelanau Township. I've been a resident off and on around here since 1954. In 1974, I was an aircraft commander in the Air Force, and I brought a C-141 into Traverse City, Cherry Capital Airport, and we were your air show. I mean that. We were the air show. We landed at 8:30 and the dignitaries were there, and we opened the airplane up, and until 4:30 in the afternoon my crew and I were tour directors. It was a different airport, same runways but different airport. I was flying an airplane that's no longer in the inventory. There's one in the museum. It was a C-141. It's a 4-engine high-wing transport airplane. It looked very similar to the C-5, which is still flying. The 141 was selected that summer because we were under the influence of the Arab oil embargo that had been slapped on us about 10 months earlier. And the Pentagon had the request from General Clark to have an airplane at the air show, and a C-5 was out of the question. They had been here in '73, and that airplane ate fuel like nothing else, so we were sent. It was an experience I'd never experienced or had before, and it was something I wish I could have done again. Never got the opportunity. But I was told, and I had in writing, that I would do a max performance takeoff if possible. Now, what that means is a big airplane like that normally takes off, and it's a very slow, lumbering occasion. When you have a big airplane with the power we had and basically empty weight, we took off, and the people that were at the airport to witness it were impressed, to say the least. 2 weeks later, I was in Germany, and I heard through the grapevine about the takeoff we had made in Traverse City, or Traverse City, as it is commonly referred to. And I left the Air Force in 1975, and I went to work for the Air Force Reserve, still flying their airplanes. I left there in 1985, and I went to work in the commercial business. I got into the inside, and I helped build an airline, the Piedmont Commuter System. And there was a question that I asked the carriers, the major carriers, and I never received an answer. So I'm going to ask it this morning, if I may, and maybe you will remember it and you can ask people that you encountered. But at what point do we get the airport's proposal on how we get to share the savings that the carriers claim they need for reduced power takeoffs? They will get. And nobody's ever accepted that as a challenge and said, well, you are partners in it. We own the airport. We're very big partners in it. The operation of an airport is entirely different than anything else, other than maybe a county. You're working with a small city. They produce their own power. They have their own security. They're very good at what they do. And they also are partners with the carriers. But for carriers to start dictating what they have to have for the bottom line profit is not a good way to run an airline. And I ask you people, hold your ground. You own a very valuable property. Do some research and find out just exactly what is involved with it. And you'll find out that airports are totally different from anything else you've encountered. So, good luck with the problem, because it's going to get very complicated.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else? Any other public comment? Seeing none, I'll bring it back to the board. Were there any comments from the commissioners? Commissioner Ansari?
We have submitted questions and stuff, and today's not the day probably to try to address all that, but I'm assuming we're going to get questions.
Yeah, let me respond, and Mr. Klein can respond. Mr. Eldridge, your Grand Traverse County, both Grand Traverse County Board and Leelanau County submitted questions that we have forwarded to Mr. Klein. We have met twice since December, and our goal is to have a report with those responses by February 1st. The next step would be I'll put this on the February board agenda, and that way, hopefully by then, you'll have the report. You can look at that. You can ask more questions. This is an ongoing process. So, Grand Traverse County Board is discussing this, I believe, next week, next Wednesday morning. I'll be at that meeting. Mr. Elger is here at this meeting to get the comments. If people from the public have comments, feel free to pass them on. Some already have. Ted, I already passed on some comments that I passed on to Mr. Klein. Mr. Anzorgi, you sent me an email last week. We passed those on. So we're trying to get all those answers. So I'll encourage the commissioners and the public, if you have additional questions you'd like to have answered, please forward them to me. I think Mr. Bunnett brought it up, but all these presentations, these boards are on our website, that you can look at those. because I know it's hard to come here and look at all this and get this information. So I encourage you to go on the website, look at these presentations. If you have any questions, contact myself or contact one of the commissioners and funnel those questions back to us. Between Mr. Klein, Mr. Elger, and I will do our best to try to respond to every one of those questions.
Commissioner Redden.
I would just like to say thank you to all the people that did speak to us today, because we don't have the answers. We still have the questions too. We're holding another public forum, public hearing, on this subject. And the more information that we have, the better informed we will be to make our decisions. So I really appreciate you all being here today.
Just one comment just to dispel any rumors, because one of the concerns I've had, and obviously this is our first public hearing, is that people are assuming we're going to make a final decision here in the next month or two, and that's not going to happen. This is the beginning of the beginning. There's a recommendation that you just received last month. You set up the public forums, a lot of questions. Well, a lot of the questions were brought up today about the articles of incorporations, about eminent domain, about membership. All that has to be worked out. So we're just at the beginning of the process.
Commissioner Sutis.
I too will offer appreciation and thanks for your being here. And also want to make the comment, I think it was clear with many of the comments made today and the questions that I keep getting from members in my district is, how do I crosswalk what the current agreement is and what an authority would do? Meaning, specifically, what would change? And how does that impact the county ownership, and flow of information back and forth to the members of the public? So I think that's something that's just not clear to members of the public, and it's not clear to me either. And I realize in part of taking on the defining, answering the questions, some of that will become clear. But if the question is, why are we doing this? If it ain't broke, don't fix it. Then I think being able to crosswalk whatever those changes would be and how they impact the current structure is really important, not only for public understanding, but for us as well. So that's a request I would have. Thank you. And thank you for coming today, both of you.
Any other commissioner comments? Did you want to address any of that, Mr. Klein?
One, thank you. Those comments from both the public and from the board members are spot on where we are in the process today. And I think these comments are generating how we move forward, specifically with answering questions, making sure all that is documented, but also providing the examples of what would an authority look like and what would a modified commission look like. So exactly to your point, how do you make the best decision in comparing those? And at the end of the day, it's going to come down to what is the best path forward. And so going through the process, it's identifying what that path is and creating that best path forward. So the advantages of the governance committee is they got to hear a lot of that information. So we're bringing that now to you, and we'll continue to do so as we go through the process. No one's asking for a decision tomorrow or February or March, but as we go through the process, as we get towards summertime, hopefully we will have delivered all the information to make the best decision going forward for both counties and public.
Yeah, and I guess I'd like to say, just as part of the commission that looked at whether we do a modified commission or an authority, is that we don't know what either one looks like really at this time, because we know that if we do a modified commission, we'd have to change everything in there anyway and make it up. And if we go with an authority, we have to make all the decisions of who's on it, the same type of thing. So we just, my thinking was that it was easier and probably better to go with the authority. And it would solve many of the problems that would have to have almost, well, I don't know, legal language to separate it all, whether it's the easements issues, the land issues, and all of that. So that's why I voted for the recommendation that it move forward as an authority, because I felt it would solve the problems in a more clean manner, I guess, than a commission would. So that's, but we don't really know what it looks like, and whether we talk about eminent domain or transportation, you know, that it has to go on track. That all has to be put into the document that would be, form the authority. And we can do all of that, you know, and hopefully we can use Grand Rapids and Mr. Baldwin's expertise to make sure that those protections are put in there. And that's, I think that's at least my perception of what we're trying to do. We're not trying to pull anything over anybody's ears, trying to make the airport, you know, less friendly. We want to try to make it more friendly, more easily to run it, and also better for the public. Commissioner Answer.
I look at, you know, some of the problems that we need to address can be addressed either way.
Exactly.
And what I really look at it, and I say, maybe we should make some decisions to say, what are we going to do about eminent domain? You know, if we can come to that decision, you know, between the two counties to say, this is where we're looking at least we solve that portion of it, whether it's an authority or a modified commission. And some of those things, we're going to have to decide irregardless. So, you know, as far as how do we move forward, I don't think we need to make the decision which governance model we need to use. We need to make the decisions on some of these questions to say, here's how we're going to address eminent domain. Here's how we're going to address accountability. Here's how we're going to address qualifications to be on whatever governance model we choose. And those are the things we're going to have to address anyway. So maybe we make that the path to make, you know, come to those decisions, and then the decision on the governance model may become very apparent. But I don't know, you know, but some of those things I think we need to address. Thank you.
Commissioner Rush.
I don't disagree with the way you framed that. There are, some of the issues are very simple to decide. Some of those issues will be decided either form of the chosen type of governance. However, there are other issues that require being rectified, that have to be rectified, and the cost of rectifying that to the counties, that's what I think we were kind of taking into consideration. The cost to rectify those areas that are not in compliance with the FAA, and how does that affect being able to maintain a license at the airport so we fly. So that was a concern. If we continue to stay as a commission, now we're talking dollars for the counties, each county. Under an airport authority, the FAA looks at those problems in a different light. So, and I think what Will said, you know, as far as fixing those problems, the process that would be used to fix the process, and the cost and the time, and that's something that we will decide going forward. But I think Ted said it best. What are the problems? What are the details that support the problems? And how do we fix it efficiently and effectively? So we do have a lot of work ahead of us.
And just one point, just for clarification. When the whole discussion of Costco started approximately 4 years ago, we actually got our legal counsel involved, Mr. Stoker. He looked at the governance documents. He pointed out at that time there were serious concerns with the current governance documents. So we had to go through this process anyway. You know, 20 years seems like a long ways out, but because of the leases and so forth, and when we had dialogue, and it was good to dialogue between Grand Traverse County, Leelanau County, the airport, and this whole Costco. Our attorney, not specifically talking about Costco, reviewed the documents, and he says there are some major conflicts there with the FAA guidelines and everything. So he pointed out even approximately 4 years ago, we have to make some changes. It's just how we wish to proceed. And we're trying to be as open as possible, and one of the things that Mr. Alger, Mr. Klein and I talk about is we don't want Grand Traverse County going one path, us going a different path, and having a lot of extra dialogue. So at some point, we're going to propose to make a joint meeting so we can get feedback from everybody. And so we make the use of our time as efficient as possible, but just want to make sure everyone understands, we're not going to rush this process. There's no timeline to get this done this winter or this spring. Even during our discussions, I believe we talked about maybe having a decision by December. And that's kind of, it's the slide's gone, but one of those ones even has that timeline. But we knew that even when we got done with the governance review, it would take at least another year to go through all these questions. Yeah, so I mean, that was developed before any of this even came to the board, that we knew it was going to take a long time to go through all these questions. Because many of the same questions are brought up here, the ones that we brought up also, and that our attorneys brought up. So the good news is we're all kind of saying the same thing. We need just answers what path we want to go on. And there is no right path or wrong path. It's just what's best for the airport and what's best for Grand Traverse and Leelanau County.
All right. So then that covers, I think, the governance options for Cherry Capital Airport, and I believe then that concludes this meeting. Yes.
Was there any more comments?
Was there any more comments from the public at all? Please.
Mr. Chairman, I worked for the Bell System 30 years, and we used to critique I worked in advertising elements. After a campaign, we always critique what happened, trying to improve upon it. We had a consultant come in one time and talk to us, and he talked about things that cannot be improved upon. I wish I had a list of all the things he said that could not be improved upon. And the two that I remember, one is, how does a fireman get from the second floor to the first floor? They've never been able to improve upon the fireman's pole. The quickest way to get from there here is the fireman's pole. The other one was a wheel. Stop thinking about how to make the wheel rounder. My point here is, maybe it's the lousy one, is the airport is working very successfully. Let's not be talking about how well it's running. I mean, we already know that. Let's focus on some of the deficiencies, like it's been brought up here before, and not change the way. Why we want to change, it's not broken, why we're wanting to change it. So I suggest, and I'm so surprised, Mr. Chairman, it sounds like you've already made a decision, and it sounds like there's a lot of information still not made. If I understood your previous remarks that you voted for the authority, I'd ask you to wait and get all the facts and see what's best for our county. As this gentleman and some of the other couple of attorneys said, this is a huge asset we have. Let's protect that and work out the deficiencies that are mentioned here. Thank you.
Thank you. Any other comments? Seeing none, this meeting's adjourned. We'll give the, yes.
I was just going to say recess.
Yeah, we're going to give the clerk 5 minutes at